Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of science fiction and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I'm, of course, robcasting it. You imagination connoisseurs, you who make up this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, the greatest community on YouTube. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Today's a big day in my life. Well, it was a big day in my life 15 years ago, and the year prior to that. As many of you know, I spent a long time working on the movie Superman Returns. I have 2 screen credits in the end of the film. I was the documentarian, I was the on-set, I don't know if I'm called documentary or documentarian, I don't know what I'm called. But I was on set with my team every single day of production of that film. During principal photography, I started covering it. It started shooting in February of 2005. And then I was covering the film all the way back in August of 2004. That was the first time I went and shot behind the scenes. Actually, that's not true. Even before then. Oh, no, that's true. 2004. And then August of 2004 was the first time I started shooting footage of Guy Dias, and they were storyboarding everything. They were building models and set design and everything. And today is the 15th anniversary of the release of Superman Returns. And I thought we'd take a look back and look at how the film is perceived. Where does it fit in the pantheon of comic book movies? Of course, the film was written by Dan Harris and Mike Dougherty, who wrote X-Men 2, and the film was directed by, of course, Bryan Singer, who ushered in the modern era of comic book movies with 2000's X-Men. The success of X-Men, the approach that Bryan took with X-Men revolutionized what comic book movies could be, how people thought of them, certainly how Hollywood thought of them, and we are now, I mean, it's hard to believe that X-Men is now old enough to drink, but that's true. It came out 21 years ago, and there's, I think, a lot to talk about. And Superman Returns is liked, it's disliked. There's a lot of things about it that make it unique. It's kind of an outlier amongst all of comic book films. So I figured it was, it was time, being that it's the 15th anniversary of the release of the movie right before the July 4th holiday, back in 2006, that it would be a good time to pretty much take a gander. You know I love my movie anniversaries. And, of course, I mean, I lived in Australia for a year covering the film. A lot of things happened during that year. And I was just coming off of Chronicles of Narnia, where we spent 14 months in country in New Zealand covering The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the making of that film. But what was different was, wait a minute. Hold on a second. I have somebody calling me on the phone. Go figure. Hello there. Who might this be?
This might be Brian.
Mr. Bryan Singer. How are you, sir?
I am doing good.
I was just giving a preamble about how in 2000 your take on the X-Men ushered in what has become the gold standard of Hollywood, which is the modern comic book film. You brought a seriousness and a gravitas to material that was not always treated that way. And of course, 5 years later, you started shooting Superman Returns, and 15 years ago today, Superman Returns was released to the public. And since, gosh, it's amazing you just happened to call me right at this moment.
It's very coincidental.
Very
coincidental. Almost uncanny.
Uncanny. Oh, listen to you. You cut up. Well, listen, since I happen to have you here, I was curious. 15 years have passed. I mean, you've made a lot of films. Some have won Academy Awards. You've really had a great career behind you. And looking back at this film, at Superman Returns, I was wondering, how do you feel about it today? And how does it fit in your oeuvre? And were there things you might have done differently? And how do you think it fits into the whole sort of modern pantheon of comic book adaptations?
Jeez, that's a long question.
I know, right?
Yeah, well, there's the feeling now, and then there's the feeling at the time, and then there's the feeling making it. I mean, making it, I felt a very romantic affection for Richard Donner's original Superman, the movie from 1978. So I was making ostensibly a sequel to that movie, and trying to create some kind of love story between Lois, this gentleman Richard, and also Clark and Superman. So it was sort of this strange, and I was also using a new camera system called the Genesis cameras, which was my first foray into digital. So it was a lot of new things. And then from a design standpoint, we were looking at all this Art Deco, so sort of homaging the origin of the comic. So that was what the intention was. Then came the reality that it was a summer movie, and people, particularly male audience, or general summer movies, amped up for more action-packed stuff. So I got hit with a bit of counter-programming with Devil Wears Prada, which took me a while to see because I felt I took a lot of my female audience away, and I eventually saw that movie, and now I'm a big fan of it. But at the time, it lacked what I think the expectation for a summer movie was, and I learned a kind of lesson from that experience. Now, in retrospect, looking way back at it, and it's not like I sit, you know me, I don't sit and watch my movies like repeatedly, but in looking at it, it's there are scenes in it, and there are moments in it, and then there are some moments in John's score, and there's moments that are just, I find very beautiful and very elegant to me, and they remind me of why I did the movie. So I savor those. There's other parts that I felt were long, and then there's a part of me that thought, shit, I should have done. I'm sorry for my language, but I should have redone an origin story. But that wasn't what I was feeling at that time. I was still I have such affection for what Richard Donner did, because he really pioneered this stuff back in the 70s. That I just didn't feel I was ready to just redo it. I had to sequelize it, and that's what I did. And that's the long answer to your long question.
Well, I think what's interesting now is, looking back, the film is singular in the sense that I think that there's a melancholy and there's a yearning, and the idea that a superhero, we're so used to heroes knowing their place in the world. They're heroes, so they don't necessarily doubt themselves, and they always seem to know who they are. But I think one of the beautiful things about Superman Returns is Superman is sort of lost. And at the beginning of the film, he comes back and he has the gut punch of seeing Lois Lane's article, Why the World Doesn't Need a Superman. And in a way, he's saying to his mother, maybe I'll just stay here. Maybe the world really doesn't need me. And I think that that's one of the most unique elements of the film, and maybe it was challenging for audiences because they weren't used to seeing that. Maybe some didn't even want that, but I feel that that's what gives the film a continued resonance and legitimacy 15 years later. And I was curious how much of that, were you conscious of that? Is that something that you really wanted to examine?
I think the biggest thing, and I don't know if this will get me in trouble, but it was almost a religious allegory. I felt that the original Superman, put in a vessel, sent off and raised by others, but from royalty to come back into royalty, is the story of Moses. And in this movie, and it's really overboard with the imagery, right? To the when Lex Luthor plunges a dagger, a piece of kryptonite into him, that's the spear. He falls to earth in a cross shape. I mean, to me, the awkwardness of being a savior who's the Christ allegory, for lack of a better terminology, to me, the awkwardness of being being the savior that no one knows quite what to do with at the time. I mean, they're happy, they're excited, some are thrilled, some are confused. So I kind of focused. I said, well, if Superman the movie is going to be Moses, this is going to be Christ. And yet, I had the Brando, I had those excerpts I optioned that I used, and so it was kind of I was playing around with some religious allegory, which was, that was very special to me and conscious to me. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I am fascinated by religion, and I think there was that, but I think. I think it was less that and more that people weren't expecting a romantic Superman movie. They wanted him to come and kick ass, and he just was. It wasn't that kind of movie. I've done those kinds of movies. I've done a number of them, but it just wasn't that one. But now in retrospect, there is some action. There's some cool scenes in it. But we were doing stuff that was very complicated with visual effects at the time. I mean, now things that are effortless with hair and capes and CG, we're very advanced at that. We're not very advanced at that stage, and very challenging. So there was that as well that I was fighting up against, and a schedule and a budget and all that.
Well, I'm curious too, because we really haven't talked about this. I mean, obviously you've directed 5 comic book films, 4 X-Men movies, and Superman Returns, obviously, and now they've become the cornerstone of Hollywood, the bread and butter of. Why do you think that superheroes have suddenly, well, not suddenly, but over the last 21 years, and you ushered in this era, your work in the first X-Men, why do you think that superheroes have become so important, not just to the box office, but to our culture as a whole?
Well, I say that it literally comes from my earliest interviews that I did on probably X-Men 1, where I said, these are our modern day mythologies. I mean, these characters, the boldness of them, however flamboyant, however large, however dark and secretive, whatever they are, they were crafted in the last century, or the previous century, and they are our modern day mythologies. And so they're kind of coming into their own. And it happens to be ushered in with X-Men and Spider-Man, eventually the Marvel Universe converging, and it's no secret that's happened. It's just happened at such a rapid, much more rapid level than I would have anticipated.
Now, as a filmmaker and as an artist, what's it like for you to look back on work, that you've done a while ago? Do you ever look back on it and think, how would I have done it better? Are you happy with the work? How does it fit in to the pantheon of everything that you've done? And when you look back at Superman Returns, how do you feel about it now?
I feel I feel the duality of how it was not what people, I think, were expecting. I mean, it did well, but decently, but it wasn't what people, I think, were expecting at the time. But I also feel the good part of me, the pride in it, is the fact that it differentiates itself so much from a lot of the other, from definitely the X-Men stuff and other things. It's like its own thing, even the look of it. Maybe it's that system we were using. I don't know what it is. it kind of differentiates itself. It's its own movie. It never got sequelized. It kind of floats in there, and in a unique way, and that's where I'm proud of it, I guess. But there's always something you would have done different. You would have done, I could point to things in all my films I would have done different. The little things, I would have tightened that. I would have cut a few one-liners here, there. I would have chopped off 20 minutes here, there. And I'm talking about a bunch of films here, not just that one. But that's a normal, that's a normal filmmaker's thing. I believe I'm like Peter Weir. I always believe the director's cut should be shorter.
Well, that's, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, have you ever thought about going back and revisiting Superman Returns and maybe doing some kind of an extended version of the film?
Oh, no. I mean, you can look online and see him traveling in this crystal spaceship, and, this stuff is, I'd feel weird. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'd be sitting there with old footage, and I just never thought of doing that with anything.
Right.
We did a rogue cut on, we did a rogue cut on X-Men Days of Future Past. I remember that was important because there was a different kind of movie when Anna Paquin was in it. So that I felt made sense to do an alternate cut. But beyond that, no, I've never thought of going back and doing that.
Well, I know. Go ahead.
And I was saying, I just dug up. I was going through the garage before I came to New York, and I dug up I found these old cards that Eva Marie Saint sent me with pictures she'd take of my mom on set, and it brought back some strong memories a week ago. You just reminded me of that she was in the picture.
Well, I think I know we don't have you for very long, and I thank you for calling in, Brian. But I think it's always interesting to see as the years tick by. We all grew up being film fans, and there are people, and I see them in the live chat right now. Damo Davies says, "I absolutely adore Superman Returns, and I think it's a great sequel to Superman the movie and Superman 2. I prefer Superman Returns any day of the week over Man of Steel." So,
well, Damo, you're very kind. I'm very, I'm my hat's off always to filmmaker colleagues, and so it's hard for me to make comparisons like that. But that's very sweet.
well, listen, man, I want to thank you for calling in on this iconic day of an iconic film. 15 years. I can't believe it's been 15 years. I feel like we were in Sydney yesterday. It sure was a fun time, though.
It was a crazy time. Yeah, remember that one place that we would go, the Friday night?
Cafe Pacifico.
Cafe Pacifico with the concrete stairs. I was always afraid one of us were going to fall down.
Those were good nights, and your bar tabs were the biggest I think I've ever seen.
Jesus. Yes, okay.
Well, listen, sir, I will let you go. Thanks for calling. Thanks for being on the show. Say hi to your dad for me when you FaceTime with him.
Oh, absolutely, I will. And thank you, and thanks for everybody for watching, listening.
All right, man. I will talk.
Right,
I'll see you when you get back.
Yep, see you then.
All right, bye. Well, I want to thank, what a surprise, Brian Singer calling in on the show. Who would have thought, huh? But yeah, so for me, it's really interesting when I started working on Superman Returns, it was just in the conceptual stages. The script was still being, they were doing some rewrites and changes and things like that, but Guy Dias and his whole art department, people like Gabriel Hardman, were drawing storyboards and coming up with what the film would look like, and it was really interesting to be back and to be in that. I was on the Warner Brothers lot. I went up. The first thing I did shooting on the movie was going to the art department, meet Guy, and Guy, obviously, he was the production designer on X-Men 2 for Brian as well, and so it was kind of a natural progression that they were doing Superman Returns together, and it was really apparent that they were going for a very classical look to the film. And I was blown away by the care and the craft that was on display. I mean, people take it for granted now, but the amazing amount of creativity that obviously is born out of the screenplay, but when you're actually in the art department and you're watching people painting images, they'll read what it says in the script, but the first time you see these things visualized, they were doing digital paintings of just scenes, overall scenes, like what does this scene look like? And it began with that art department, and what Guy would do, he had to create, what does a Metropolis police uniform look like? What is the logo on it? I mean, there was so much that was being created for that film on every different level. And I was blown away, and because I had Brian's full trust, I could take my camera anywhere and talk to anybody. And you can see, maybe one day I'll release a 6-hour version of the documentary I made, because I certainly have the footage. And we shot about 1,500 hours of behind-the-scenes footage on the making of the film, and if you watch Brian's blogs during the making of that film, it was very interesting. At the same time, Peter Jackson was making King Kong. We actually did a crossover blog, unbeknownst to the studio. Universal and Warner Brothers didn't know, and we had such a really a great time. And it was one of the great times of my life for the year that I spent in Australia and covering the film. I was only contracted to cover the actual physical production of the film, so there isn't a lot about post or visual effects. I have some stuff, but it just wasn't part of my mandate. But it was still, I really think if you ever watch my documentary that's on the Blu-ray, it is, not just mine, but everybody else that worked on it, it really does give you a fly-on-the-wall feel for what it was like to make that movie. And for me, what do I think of the film? Well, it's hard for me to judge. I mean, when you're watching a movie get made every single day, and you're watching the amazing creativity of all different, the craftspeople that work on a film, I mean, this was an enormous production, and everybody does their part. I mean, on one hand, the producers had to figure out, okay, we're going to be shooting in downtown Sydney with 1,000 extras in the streets. How do you clothe those people? How do you feed those people? Where do they go to the bathroom? So the producing staff, I think, did a wonderful job. Gilbert Adler, Chris Lee, and everyone else that was working in the production team of that film just did a masterful job. And we were all over Sydney for that year, and obviously we're at Fox Studios, where they had shot The Matrix previously, and it was just, I mean, it was one of the great years of my life, and I learned so much about how a $200 million movie is made. Literally, all I did all day was watch how a movie's made and ask questions. So one day, 15 years later, I still have yet to really apply everything I learned working on movies like Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Superman Returns, because how many people get an education where they're actually on set every day watching a $200 million movie get made, and then they're in the edit bay at night. I mean, I went and hung out in John Ottman's edit bay every day with Elliot and John, because I'm an editor myself. I was at the time. I learned so much about my craft working on the film. So I think what Brian said, it wasn't the kind of movie that people were expecting or necessarily hoping for, and I can totally understand that. But I think there's a group of people that really kind of understand what Brian was trying to do, and it's not the traditional superhero film, but I do think it is a beautiful movie. I think it's a heartfelt movie. It's very different than what you might expect, and I think what's really interesting about the film is it humanizes both Kal-El and Superman to the point where people aren't used to that. It really, as a movie, it brings Superman more down to earth, I think, than any film, or one of the only stories that humanizes Superman to that extent, both for better or for worse. And it's something that, is really up to the viewer. But I like what Brian said, that it's a singular, standalone kind of film. There's nothing else like it. It's certainly an outlier in all the stories of Superman. And I think if you go into it and watch it for what it is rather than what it's not, I think it's a very rewarding film. And I have to say, one of the things that I was able to see in terms of the work that was done on the movie was both Kate Bosworth and Brandon Routh. They really worked hard. I'm a huge fan of both of them. Brandon had so much on his shoulders, and it couldn't have been fun for him, working out as much as he had to work out. I mean, he was in unbelievable shape. He was monstrously huge, and he had to do that all day, and the weight of that whole movie was on his shoulders. And I think that also Kate Bosworth doesn't get enough credit for her performance in the movie. I think she's a wonderful actress, and she actually was a wonderful human being as well. So I'm a big fan of hers. I liked everybody that worked on the film. It was a great bunch of folks. Now, I did want to bring up a dissenting point of view. I did read an article that I wanted to touch base with, because I would be remiss if I didn't address the fact that there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily fans of the film, and I understand that, because it's not the kind of movie that they were expecting, and I completely understand that, and it would be disingenuous of me as a fan, and it's not like I haven't read every article that that exists when it comes to Superman Returns, because I certainly have. So I definitely would like to read an article that isn't exactly the most flattering account, but I think it's definitely something that is worth sharing on this day, because adults can take the good with the bad. I think that's an important thing to do. But this article, I'm just going to read it. It comes from Flickering Myth, and it is written by Ricky Church, and it was published today. Flickering Myth. Superman Returns not so triumphant. 15th anniversary. Back in 1978, Superman the movie blew audiences away with the first big screen adventure of the Man of Steel. Well, that's not entirely true. Starring Christopher Reeve as Superman from director Richard Donner, Superman became a huge film, set a benchmark for most superhero films, and spawned 3 sequels. When the 4th film failed at the box office and garnered many negative reviews, the Superman franchise was shelved. After many false starts of sequels or reboots, it would be 19 years later when Superman soared back to the big screen with the appropriately titled Superman Returns, only this also failed to garner much attention, and a planned sequel was scrapped, with Warner Brothers eventually deciding on a full reboot with Man of Steel. As Superman Returns celebrates its 15th anniversary, we look back on why it was a lackluster return for Superman on the big screen. I would never, by the way, say it was lackluster in any way, shape, or form. It was A-list all the way. Warner Brothers hired X-Men director Bryan Singer after he came in with a pitch that would not reboot the Superman franchise like previous attempts in the 2 decades, but would instead continue the continuity from the Reeve films. Singer had actually left production on his 3rd X-Men film for Superman Returns, which also celebrated his 15th anniversary recently, and funny enough had its own very mixed reception. Written by Singer's X2 screenwriters Mike Dougherty and Dan Harris, Superman Returns saw Superman come back to Earth after a 5-year absence, traveling through space to the remains of Krypton. He returns to a world that has seemingly moved on without him, and Lois Lane, now engaged and a mother to a young boy. As the world celebrates his return, Superman's arch-nemesis, Lex Luthor, has been released from jail and is plotting yet another deadly real estate scheme. In place of Christopher Reeve, after both his tragic accident and passing, Brandon Routh donned the S in the red cape for the film. To Routh's credit, he does a fairly good job in his performance as both Superman and Clark Kent, particularly the latter, as he captures Clark's nerdy, bumbling persona pretty well, while also showing how he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, quite literally at one point too. As Superman, Routh displays a more introspective take than one might expect as Superman comes to grips with how much has changed for his personal life. He doesn't quite capture the charm of Reeves' takes on the character, which is a tall order for any actor, but Routh did capture the heroic nature of Superman as he wrestled with the responsibility he felt to the planet. Where it failed wasn't in Routh's performance, but in the characterization of Superman. Now, I would say, as many people have said, I don't think the characterization of Superman in this movie is a failure. I think it's a very specific and very intentional intent to look at Superman as a person. I mean, I dare say not a human being, but as a human being, as a intellect, as an entity, as a thoughtful and feeling person. That Superman, we expect Superman to always be Superman. But the fact is, any thinking person who loves or worries or wonders, the idea that Superman was humanized in the film is kind of the point. And I love that about the movie. It was a shame since Ralph showed potential to grow in more adventures, but he at least got a chance to play Superman again in the CW's Arrowverse crossover, Crisis on Infinite Earths, as an older version of the Superman, helping other heroes of the multiverse save it from destruction. One of the main problems with the film is that Superman just doesn't completely feel like Superman, much less the one Reeves spent 4 films establishing, right? Because he's changed. He's gone home and he's witnessed the destruction of his homeworld firsthand, and he comes back to a world which seemingly doesn't need him anymore. And even Superman had to feel the sting of that, and that's what's interesting about the movie. It's not that Ralph Singer and others shouldn't be allowed to take the chance to evolve the role and character, but more so this particular interpretation just falls flat for the most part in several aspects. The idea, for instance, Superman would simply leave Earth behind without telling anyone, save his mother, for a journey he didn't even know he might come back from, seems particularly egregious, especially where Lois Lane is concerned. I disagree. It's something that Superman had to do for himself. He had to do it on his own. He had to do it for his own reasons. And what's sort of not really in the movie anymore, because it was cut out, there was a lot of evidence that showed that Krypton was still there that was trumped up by Lex Luthor to make him believe that was the case. So his 5 years off Earth was another dastardly thing that Luthor had done to Superman. And that's not, it was in the Friends and Family cut of the movie. It's not in the movie now. So, not to mention several times he stalks Lois and listens to her private conversations with her fiancé rather than simply talking to her right from the start. The only thing Superman Returns really gets right about Superman is his heroism, as he spends a lot of time rescuing people from a variety of dangers and expresses to Lois how he hears everyone crying out for a hero and the toll that someone takes on him. See, here's what I find interesting about this article, and also people that are dissenters in terms of Man of Steel, which is a movie I also liked. I think one of the things that's interesting to me about different takes on characters is because we believe that these characters, unfortunately, are very one-dimensional. Superman is this way. And it's difficult for us to reconcile the fact that many superheroes are, I mean, the X-Men are more humanized, but Superman has always been this larger-than-life paragon of extraterrestrial strength that is sort of beyond humanity. And in real life, nobody would really be beyond that. He feels. He thinks. If with super hearing, I mean, he can't, his father tells him, you cannot get involved with human history. He has to allow human folly to continue, and at the same time, when he can render aid, he will. I mean, how frustrating would that be if you're Superman? It's got to be tough. But anyway, you know, this I won't read this whole article, but I wanted to just touch on it because I would be remiss if I didn't touch on people's opinions of the movie. And not everybody, obviously. There's a lot of people that weren't pleased with it, but there's the Flickering Myth article that came out today. You know, if you want, if you send in questions, if you have anything specifically Superman Returns related, I'm uniquely qualified. I mean, obviously, I didn't make the movie. I just documented the making of the movie. But if there are questions that are specific to Superman Returns that you'd like to fire in, I'll answer anything you want about that. Obviously, I mean, I was even in Superman Returns, as everybody knows. I was. You only see me for a brief moment, but you hear my voice. I did play a NASA reporter in the film, which was pretty funny. I think Brian took great glee at making me suit up and play a part in the film after having pointed a camera at everyone. And I have to say, as confident as I can be in front of the camera, it was rough. So here I was. Here is where I appear in the film as I'm billed as the NASA reporter, but my name is Ross Campbell. You only see that image of me for a split second in the movie. But there I am. I was a special effect. I was obviously standing in front of a green screen. And, yeah, there I was, Ross Campbell. And that's, of course, Jimmy Olsen in the foreground. And the crew, man, it was hard because I was in front of this crew. It was a big deal because it was a main unit shoot. It wasn't second unit, and Brian was directing me. And it was, to be honest, it was quite nerve-wracking. And maybe it was my lack of performance that they only show me for a second. But, hey, they kept my line readings. They're in the movie. You can hear them. So, yeah. Boy, was that fun. Anyway, just to start with, I think I'll go back and I'll look at your questions since we're talking about Superman Returns. And a lot of people are firing those questions in. So, obviously, Damo, I already read your question to Brian himself, and he answered that. Damo's second question, do you prefer Lex Luthor as Spacey in Superman Returns or Hackman in Superman 1 and 2? Because technically they're the same iteration. Hackman for me, but Spacey is no slouch. Both are double Oscar winners. You know, I think that there was... Kevin Spacey did bring more of a dark malevolence to the role in certain aspects, and I did like that. I mean, obviously, Gene Hackman... I liked Hackman, I think, a little better because Spacey had somebody to emulate, and I think Spacey did a really great job as well. But, you know, everybody was trying to follow on the heels of other people. I would have liked to have seen Spacey maybe not have the template of Gene Hackman. So I'd say I liked Gene Hackman in the first film better, but I still think Spacey delivered a great performance. And you can see that his seething anger was brewing just below the surface, and I really liked that about Spacey's performance, which Gene Hackman didn't really have. Sends in a super chat sticker, a diamond. So thank you for that. Sheriff Carl, who is up in the PNW, says, dude, it's hotter than a $2 pistol here. 15 years since Superman Returns. All I can really remember was being in Sweden, and Burger King had this giant Superman Whopper that ruled. What's the best movie tie-in menu item you've ever had? Well, you know what? It was probably the McDonald's Happy Meals for Star Trek The Motion Picture. And I don't think necessarily it's because of the food, but it was just great to have the first Happy Meal be Star Trek The Motion Picture. It was Star Trek. So I loved it. But in terms of a menu item, maybe the marshmallow dispenser from Star Trek V. Probably the drinks that they used to have at the ArcLight. Whenever a big movie would happen, they would craft some special cocktail, and those were probably my favorite. Evan Newman says, do you know if Warner Brothers ever asked Brian to make a Superman Begins origin movie a la Batman Begins? I would think it would be natural that Warner Brothers might want to start with a clean slate on Superman after just greenlighting a Batman origin. No, as far as I know, they never did. There is a sequel script to Superman Returns that deals with Brainiac, and I know that after the summer of 2006, Brian and I had many long conversations about what a Superman 2 movie would be, and I actually had a idea that I had come up with that he was quite fond of with Brainiac, but unfortunately it didn't go anywhere, which was a bummer. So no. Royce Freeman says, even though Singer loved Donner's Superman, he follows the theatrical Superman 2 where Superman doesn't turn the world back and Lois got pregnant. Yes, that's true. He does follow the Superman 2. The world was turned back in Superman 1. Well, here's the thing. The world wasn't turned back. Superman went back in time. At least that's the way that I've always read it. He went back in time and he changed the past. I just think visually it shows that was the way they showed time travel, but it was Superman traveling back through time to prevent things. But yeah, that's what they were doing. That's what they're doing. Royce says, may Singer release a revised cut one day, trimming stuff and adding other stuff? Well, I think you heard it pretty definitively. He's told me that he won't do it. He's not interested in going back and doing those kinds of things, even though I was partial to the Friends and Family cut, the first version of the finished film that I saw. And keep in mind, I watched it being edited for two years, so I saw every iteration. of the film that existed, and I was particularly fond of what they showed as the Friends and Family cut that did open with the return to Krypton scene. It had a lot more dialogue, a lot more detail, but the first 20 minutes of the movie really had no dialogue in it. A lot of people, especially younger people, were confused that didn't have any kind of a slavish devotion to Donner's original. They didn't understand what was happening with the crystal ship, looking at the remnants of Krypton and things like that, which was kind of a bummer. But what can you do? I preferred that version. Royce Freeman sends in a super chat and says, one thing the Donner cut of Superman 2 got wrong is he turns the world back but still goes back to a bar to confront a bully, and the bar still in disarray. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, there's certain things in there that are a little odd, but you know, and again, we were talking about this on the show the other day, how you know, how it doesn't work that Superman goes to take revenge. Yeah. I don't think that's a good thing at all. So yeah, craziness. It's weird. But anyway, let's see what you guys have to say, because I have a lot of letters and things because I haven't read them in a few days. And you all have something to say, as you usually do. So let's see where we're at and who's up first. Who's on first? Oh my God, Willow Yang. Not a letter about Superman Returns, but the lovely Willow Yang herself says, "Oh hi Rob. A couple of weeks ago, I've had the chance to join Torrin Atkinson and his group on another watch-along of Voyager episodes. The theme this time was Tuvok, and the episodes that were chosen were Wandering Thoughts and Riddles, the latter of which I'm writing to discuss. To give a recap, Neelix and Tuvok are returning to the Voyager after a diplomatic mission with the Casats. Neelix, being Neelix, gives Tuvok a riddle about an ensign who is stranded on a deserted planet with nothing but a calendar, but managed to survive an entire year in spite of having no food available. How did he survive? He sustained himself on the dates in the calendar. The terrible dad joke short-circuits Tuvok's brain, sending him into neuroleptic shock, and he collapses on the deck, convulsing. He's brought back on board the Voyager and treated by the doctor, but in spite of regaining consciousness, appears to have lost most of his memories and his Vulcan control of emotions. Neelix, overcome with guilt for breaking Tuvok's brain, takes it upon himself to help the latter recover, and Tuvok, in his compromised state, ends up forming a friendship with him. Unable to resume his work on the bridge, Tuvok instead starts working in the kitchen alongside Neelix, making only desserts because they taste good. Eventually, the doctor is able to find a cure to restore Tuvok. Tuvok is initially reluctant to undergo the procedure, not wanting to lose his friendship with Neelix, but eventually agrees to it after Neelix states that the Voyager needed its tactical officer. Unfortunately, the procedure apparently doesn't completely restore Tuvok, as at the end of the episode he tells the terrible dad joke that the ensign in Neelix's riddle sustained himself on the Sundays in the calendar, causing half of the audience to go into neuroleptic shock. The end. Terrible. Okay, I acknowledge that I may have stretched the truth a bit about Neelix being the one responsible for Tuvok's neurological damage. There was also the attack on Tuvok by a mysterious alien that might have contributed to his condition. The Voyager consults with an extremely eager Casat ghost hunter, Narok, for help regarding the attack. Narok immediately concludes that it was the work of the Burnett, an apparently invisible and highly paranoid group of aliens. With Tuvok and some bargaining, the Burnett provide the Voyager with information on how to restore Tuvok's mind. But as someone in the watch-along group stated, Neelix could very well have given someone brain damage with his constant blathering. In all seriousness, however, in spite of my general disdain toward the character, I do have to begrudgingly give him some credit in riddles. I do think he was used relatively well in the episode, and the friendship that he formed with Tuvok was pretty cute. I don't, however, buy into the notion that Tuvok, prior to his brain injury, did actually like Neelix, but just refused to show it. He was fantasizing about strangling Neelix to death in Meld. If he did actually secretly enjoy Neelix's companionship, that is a rather strange manner of showing it. Neelix aside, I do also quite like the moral question that Riddles presented. Should Tuvok undergo the procedure to restore his mind to what it was prior to Neelix's riddle, or the attack by the Ba'neth, depending on which version of the story you believe? While that answer might appear obvious to most audience members at first glance, yes, of course you restore Tuvok. As people in the Watchdog group pointed out, or Watch-Along group pointed out, Tuvok appears to be living a perfectly happy and fulfilling life after the incident. I do think that this situation is somewhat similar to that of the Doctor's after he suffered a breakdown in Latent Image. In both instances, a crew member is pressured to undergo a procedure in order to resume their regular duties. In the case of the Doctor, the Voyager obviously needs to have their chief medical personnel, and in the case of Tuvok, as Neelix puts it, the crew needs its tactical officer on the bridge. Latent Image, however, does diverge from Riddles in having the Doctor not being magically fixed at the end of the story, although I'm pretty certain that he's back to his normal self anyway by the next episode, whereas Tuvok is restored by the end of Riddles. Latent Image hence placed the individual above the collective, whereas Riddles did the reverse, with Neelix convincing Tuvok to undergo the procedure for the sake of the rest of the Voyager crew. Then there's the second and more interesting question. Should we even view the Doctor or Tuvok's conditions as problems that need to be fixed? In the case of the Doctor, it's more of a clear-cut one in my opinion. A person's experiences, even the negative ones, are crucial to their development. This was wonderfully illustrated in the Next Generation episode Tapestry, which depicted how instrumental a bad choice that Picard made in his youth was to his growth into the person he ended up becoming. The answer to treating the Doctor isn't to delete the memory of the traumatic experience he's had, but to help him learn to get through it and grow as a person, or more accurately, AI. Tuvok's case, on the other hand, is more complicated, as he has become an almost completely different individual from whom he was. Neelix posed to 7 of 9, when is a Vulcan no longer a Vulcan? To which 7, of course, gave the greatest answer, when his genetic code is sufficiently altered. 7, however, subsequently presents a rather interesting perspective on the matter, and one that is strongly consistent with her stance in Latent Image, where she was opposed to Janeway deleting the Doctor's memory files. When she tells Neelix that Janeway helped her adapt to living outside the Borg collective, not by restoring me to what I'd been, by helping me discover what I could become. The implication here, it appears, is that the correct route was to allow Tuvok develop in his new state rather than returning him to where he was prior to the fateful trip with Neelix. In conclusion, I quite enjoyed Riddles. I think that the episode achieved the near impossible feat of making Neelix useful and somewhat tolerable, while at the same time presenting some interesting ethical and philosophical questions. The main weakness of the episode for me is that I don't think it delved into the debate enough. While 7 is able to give a compelling argument for one side, Neelix ultimately ignores her advice, and Tuvok is very quickly and easily persuaded into undergoing the procedure. Personally, I would have loved Voyager to take the risk of leaving Tuvok in his current state. Just as Tuvix never gets justice, I doubt this incident will ever be brought up again. On the bright side, however, I can't really complain about not having to hear more dad jokes from Tuvok. Live long and prosper, Willow. Willow, I love your letters. I wish that the creators, and I use that term loosely, of modern Star Trek would have someone like you vet their scripts, because, hey, that would be good. Emil Johansson writes in a letter. Emil says, "Hi, Rob. Political correctness in entertainment needs to die." I'm being serious. I believe this phenomenon is morally bankrupt and philosophically wrong, and I don't believe in it anymore. I don't believe that human beings are so fragile that if others don't apologize enough or showcase random representation enough, the world will end. There are people here with real issues. There are complex situations that are horrible to live in. That reality, and if people want to do good, they should try and focus on those issues. And they should try and do something about that, or formulate some valuable, relevant opinion around that. But pretending that making Loki bisexual is of huge significance or a step in the right direction, or part of a work that needs to be explored a lot more, well, no one's helping anyone. By the way, Loki has always been that way, especially if you go back to Norse mythology. It's just people now are putting it as part of a woke agenda, when really, no, they're embracing traits that Loki as a Norse figure always had. It's fooling people that the world is a nicer place because of how kind it is to showcase representation. It is an attempt to join an exclusive club of snobs that will happily burn witches as long as they don't follow their mob rule, and regardless of their character, if they actually broke any real laws. And people who fight about how kind they are to each other, deluding each other that this actually makes them better people, or that the world is actually a better place because of this. I've heard again and again about how lucky I am to be where I am and what I am, that my life is pretty pointless because it's all perfect compared to other people's sad backstories in other places that I can't even relate to. Except I never heard that from people who've actually lived in those places and have had sad backstories. Those people will tell me the exact opposite. Who should I listen to? The people who know what it's like to be a victim of mafia rule or war? Or the snobs that do nothing but push the ideology that one should cover themselves in shame for the sake of some unknown reason? I want to tell stories. That's my plan. I have no idea if people like my stories or if I will ever succeed in telling them, but that's what I want to work with. And over again, I keep going back to wondering if I should give in to all the talk about diversity and representation and have a nice morality to the story and treat main characters as if they're sacred. But I don't believe I should anymore. I don't care. What's going to happen if I don't tick all the right boxes? Will people be sad? Will people suspect I'm an evil racist? No world problem will ever be solved because people are sacrificing their stories made for entertainment to ideological nonsense. People need to stop living inside their own heads where it's so important they do this and start to actually connect with people and realize how pathetically stupid that way of thinking is. I like the show Batwoman. I'm not joking. I like it because I like Batman and I like the mythos, and I was surprised they introduced that to the CW. I like glam rock. I like Tim Fox as Batman. I believe in strong women. There's nothing wrong with diversity in my mind, but I'm getting increasingly pissed off at people who think it's of utmost importance to force diversity no matter how little it actually matters. Entertainment is entertainment, not a heroic way of changing the world. Right now there are people whom I've talked to that have to live in a world where inflation is so high people are forced to steal, and the people at the top who are supposed to look after their own citizens don't even remotely care. But somehow I'm also supposed to believe that devoting my storytelling to the black hole of political correctness will actually make a difference? I'm never going to care about that. And thanks for letting me share my anger. Well, Emil, I don't necessarily think that you're wrong. I believe that human beings were doing a pretty good job. We are on a pretty bold evolutionary course. Diversity, voices, those things were naturally they were already happening. And they were doing a very good job of it because people understood that it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do, and it was happening, and dialogue was left open. Now I believe we're in some kind of weird fascist ideological state where you have people, the mob rules here, they like going after human beings because they have the cloak of respectability and, we're doing the right thing. I don't think so. And I think it'll change. We're going to have a reckoning that we're going to have to deal with for quite some time. But for the most part, I think that eventually things are going to change. They'll shake out. I have faith. And you should too. You should have faith as well. Mario Lopez. Our man Mario Lopez all the way from Portugal. We got Emil in Sweden. We got Mario Lopez from Portugal. Mario says, "Hi, Rob. Here I am again." Mario Lopez, all the way from Portugal. I love the way you introduced me. Well, I love the fact that you're coming to us all the way from Portugal, and I mean it. You can tell because every time I think about you coming to us from Portugal, I have a smile on my face. When I was young, I did something very creative, which I'm proud of, which I sometimes talk to my friends about as one of the most amazing things we've done together. This was something I did in the 80s and 90s. I'm talking about the fact that I was a game master in 2 pen and paper role plays, first in Dragon Quest and then in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I was a game master for many years. I managed to succeed not only because I had some good ideas for adventures, but also because I mixed them with adventure books created by the games themselves, many of them from D&D, which I adapted to my role plays. I even used ideas from fantasy books and films. I used everything I could to help my creative process, but I had 2 problems I had to deal with. The first problem was the chronological order of things. At a certain point, my role play took on a dimension I didn't want, but that happened naturally. it grew to the point of where it went from being simple adventures to being long campaigns with a dozen players and many, many NPCs. The role play was already so big that at a certain stage the players had to split into small groups, even because they had already become, in certain cases, enemies of each other. Well, the first problem appeared here because I always made sure that my role play was evolving chronologically, which forced players to have to wait longer to be able to play their parts in the story I created. Let's say things grew so much that my role play reached the day that it died. My friends wanted me to continue, but I couldn't anymore. I'd reached my limit. My real life bypassed my escapism. But in a way, there was another reason for my role play to end, which I'll cover in the second problem. The second problem was I also wanted to play my role play, or even any role play. Like everyone else who has tried this hobby, I also started out as a player. But after a while, the chances of being a player ended. There was only one solution left for me: to be a player in my own role play. The character I created was that of a vampire girl who wanted to stop being undead. Her name was Gilliana von Strudendorf. Gilliana von Strudendorf. That's a great name. Her story was tragic, difficult, and long, but after many years and with the help of my friends and players, she was able to return to the condition of a normal living human being. And they made many terrible and controversial decisions along the way to get to that point. Make no mistake, they didn't make these decisions altruistically. Every role player has his agenda, his personal goals. Everyone wants more power, and power corrupts. So I think this was the second reason that my role play ended. The story I had created had ended when my vampire stopped being one. Now that I think about it, I'm a male, heterosexual, and I had no problem playing a female character. In fact, in computer games, I also always wanted to play with female characters, ladies. We have to confess, they are much prettier and enjoyable to play than male characters. There it is. Anyone can see themselves in something they're not. So I'm going to end with a question. Rob, would you be willing to spend more money to make your movie in the chronological order of events? That could make both the director and the actors feel or enjoy more of the story they were creating, right? What about wanting to be an actor in your own story? Have you never felt that you would like to be an actor or a character in your own movie? Kind regards, Mario. Well, it's funny that you asked that, Mario. When we were making Free Enterprise at first, we were going to do it ultra low budget and play ourselves. Cooler heads prevailed, however. I am by no means an actor. I think I can hold my own as a performer, but I certainly shouldn't be somebody front and center in front of the camera, leading a cast of characters. No, I don't want to do that. I've always felt like I kind of live my life like I'm in the middle of a story in a way. I do sort of feel that way. You know, you're the hero of your own story, right? So, yeah, and I've always kind of felt that way. But yeah, but I've never wanted to be there. I don't want to be an actor because I'm not an actor. There's better actors than me, and I want those better actors to be in the movie. But in terms of chronologically, yeah, I would love to shoot movies chronologically, but the problem is if you have a certain set, for instance, if you have one set that you return to again and again throughout the movie, it doesn't make sense to shoot that set, leave it and come back to it, and leave it and come back to it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Even if you wanted to shoot something chronologically, you shoot a set out. And if you're using the set over the course of the entire film, it's best to shoot everything you need from that set, even though it's not chronological. That's what a good director does, because a good director has it in his mind where the story is or where it's going. So a good director has to keep all of that, you know, in your head. So the producer in me would never let me shoot a movie chronologically unless it made sense. So I could never do that. But Mario, again, all the way from Portugal, great to hear from you. Thank you so much for that. Mike Peltier says, just for fun, I came up with a list of ingredients for good Star Trek stories. Wonder, camaraderie, science fiction, philosophy, moral challenge, drama, optimism, and the unexpected. What do you think? Which ingredients are missing? I don't know, Mike. That's a great list. A list of ingredients for good Star Trek stories. Wonder, camaraderie, science fiction, philosophy, and moral challenge. Drama, motivated and believable conflict, optimism, and the unexpected. Heck, man, that's a mantra for any great story, but I don't think any ingredients are missing. I think that's great. I would add, if I would add anything, I would say allegory as well. I would add allegory to that list. That a good Star Trek story is allegorical in nature. And what a great thing. Thanks for writing in. Short and sweet and to the point. Our friend Ash Chowan, who's apparently, he's found more out about my career as a rock star than just about anyone. And if you don't believe that about Ash, let me tell you, it's true. Ash has, he's really delved into my past more than I might care to admit. And it's, some of the things that he's uncovered of me personally, I'm surprised that Ash found some of the things about me that he did. And it was pretty scary. Like I don't usually tell people that, like I was in a band like 30 Seconds to Mars or something like that and fronted it before Jared Leto came. Look at this picture. Ash Chowan found this picture of me. That was, back in my day when I was obviously doing something different than I'm doing now. But Ash certainly has found all of those pictures, all of them, which is pretty shocking. So, Ash, here's to you. But Ash has written in a letter. So he writes in this letter. This comes from Ash. A few weeks ago, Eric Olson, producer of Netflix's Motley Crue biopic The Dirt, was on Midnight Metal as a guest, and the topic of musical biopics came up. The Dirt didn't water down unsavory aspects of the Motley Crue story, but the same cannot be said of other biopics about musical icons. I am feverishly awaiting Graham King's, producer of The Town, Hugo, and the Best Picture Oscar winner The Departed, Michael Jackson biopic. Although King produced Bohemian Rhapsody, many felt the movie was a very safe biopic when it came to depicting the life of Freddie Mercury. Since the first Borat film in 2006 propelled Sacha Baron Cohen to stardom, Cohen had been involved in some capacity with bringing the story of Mercury to the big screen. He was slated to star and had a hand in producing the screenplay. However, creative differences caused him to finally part ways with the long gestating project in 2013. Cohen wanted a grittier aesthetic compared to Queen wanting him to make a joyous film that celebrated Mercury and the band's legacy. In a 2016 interview with Howard Stern, Cohen remarked that he wanted to have a sex, drugs, and rock and roll film, an uncompromising look into Mercury's hedonistic lifestyle, but Cohen was negated by Mercury's former bandmates who were concerned about protecting Mercury's image and the band's legacy. Cohen told Stern, a member of the band, I won't say who, said, this is such a great movie because it's got an amazing thing that happens in the middle. And I go, what happens in the middle of the movie? He goes, well, Freddie dies. I go, well, what happens in the second half of the movie? He goes, we see how the band carries on from strength to strength. I said, listen, not one person is going to see a movie where the lead character dies from AIDS and then you see how the band carries on. There are amazing stories about Freddie Mercury. The guy was wild. There are stories of little people walking around parties with plates of cocaine on their heads. Although biopics are dramatizations of real-life people, they have no responsibility to portray the negative or salacious aspects of the subject that they're dramatizing. The elements that come to define that subject cannot be overlooked or ignored, especially when those elements were defining characteristics of such icons. I certainly hope the King-produced Michael Jackson film doesn't shy away from the latter part of Jackson's career that was hampered with numerous accusations about molestation. The thing that is lost about Jackson is that those accusations leveled against him were based on hearsay and nothing concrete. Even in the slickly produced 2019 documentary Leaving Neverland had many questioning the veracity of the claims leveled in the film. Jackson died in 2009 and he could not defend himself from these post-mortem accusations, and it doesn't help that the current culture doesn't care about due process or facts, but simple hearsay and rumors to define a person and their legacy even after death. But the Jackson biopic doesn't need to gloss over these accusations. Rather, the film's strength can hinge on Jackson standing firm against them and his acquittal in his 2005 molestation trial that found him not guilty on all 14 counts. Jackson did not have a normal upbringing. He never had a childhood. His father was a taskmaster that raised him to become a prodigy even at the expense of his adolescence. Jackson couldn't read comic books. He had to read music. He couldn't play baseball with the kids at the park. He had to rehearse with his brothers at the studio. He couldn't go to summer camp. He had to go on tour. He couldn't grow up the same way most of us did by learning, failing, and growing into adulthood because Jackson was raised to be a savant who ended up accomplishing more in his teenage years than many adults did in their entire lives. The Graham King-produced Michael Jackson biopic doesn't need to ignore the problematic aspects of Jackson's complicated life. Rather, the strength of the film is in embracing these aspects and using the reality of it to make people understand the type of person Jackson was. Jackson's eccentricities, born out of an enduring love of the innocence of childhood, became a part of his identity. This was a grown man trying to compensate for the childhood he was robbed of. This is a cautionary tale about how a child is groomed from birth into a 1 in 7 billion global icon. It doesn't help that Jackson was saddled with numerous health issues from an early age. He reportedly had lupus and vitiligo that altered his physical look, most famously his skin. Who can forget his famous Pepsi ad where a freak accident sent his scalp ablaze and altered his hairline forever? It also doesn't help that Jackson, for various reasons, also had numerous procedures to tweak his look, most notably his nose, which he claims had to do with breathing issues. Do you get two actors to portray Jackson, one pre-Thriller and the other post-Thriller? That can work, but it would have to be such a seamless transition, the performances in sync, that the audience wouldn't notice. That's something that cannot be pulled off no matter the level of cinematic trickery. If they were to do a biopic of Jackson post-Thriller, I think Ezra Miller would be a great choice. Not only does he look like Jackson from the 90s onward, but he's also an amazing actor that would crush it. But in today's world, simply looking like a famous pop culture icon would not suffice. I can easily hear the outrage right now about casting Miller as Jackson for obvious reasons. The only solution would be to cast one actor who can look like Jackson throughout the many stages of his life through the magic of physical makeup and CGI. Katsuhiro Tsuji, you're welcome, Rob. I can read that. The famous makeup artist who won an Oscar for his transformation of Gary Oldman into Winston Churchill in The Darkest Hour would do an amazing job at transforming an actor into Jackson. Tsuji's strength as a makeup artist doesn't come from the obvious, but from the subtleties that we often overlook about famous people. It's these subtleties that he used when he transformed Joseph Gordon-Levitt into a young Bruce Willis in Rian Johnson's Looper. The issue of Jackson's famous fluctuating nose cannot be ignored. As we know, makeup adds but does not subtract. To get the iconic look of Jackson down, CGI must be employed to rearrange and subtract from Jackson's fluid nose and face features. A mixture of practical and CGI effects can bring to life the icon that was Michael Jackson. The physical transformations of an actor portraying Jackson in the film will be something that will ultimately cause the film to sink or swim, regardless of the quality of the script. With the biopic being made in accordance with the Jackson estate, one can only hope that the movie is not a watered-down version of Jackson's life and a proverbial love letter to the myth of the man like Bohemian Rhapsody was to Freddie Mercury. I'm not asking for a Hallmark movie of the week, I'm asking for what Cohen wanted to do with Mercury. The difference is the eccentric and salacious aspects of Jackson's life can be used as a tool to help many understand the enigma that was Jackson. A competent director needs to be hired as well as an actor that will probably give the defining performance of his career and a guaranteed win for the Best Actor Oscar. Here's hoping they do justice to the icon that was Michael Jackson in making a film that is an ode to the man and an uncompromising look at his amazing, eventful, and tragic life. Well, what a great letter, Ash. I mean, look, I am certainly not sold on the viability of a Michael Jackson biopic, and look, I feel like I actually met Michael Jackson once. I've told the story. I met him at Golden Apple Comics. They closed the comic book store down, and Sharon Leibowitz, who with her husband owned Golden Apple, she let me stay in the store, and I actually got to speak to Mr. Jackson. And it was quite interesting because he was a fan. He was an imagination connoisseur. He knew the material. He loved the material. He went to Golden Apple and would spend thousands of dollars on stuff, on collectibles. And we had a conversation. And it was apparent to me that he really did love what was going on. But I can't imagine what it's like to have your childhood robbed from you. And like you pointed out in this letter, what's it like to be a person that doesn't get to stumble into adulthood and understand, come to grips, with who you are. Like, he couldn't go out on a date. He couldn't explore his own sexuality through, say, a first kiss or sticky fumblings in the backseat of a car with somebody that really wanted to be with you. And, he didn't have any of that. So obviously human beings, our biology is hardwired into us. And if you can't explore your own sexuality, whatever that sexuality may be, I can only imagine how damaging that is as you move into adulthood. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of it. Sexual pathology is some of the strongest pathology, and I'm not saying what he did was right or wrong. I don't know what Michael Jackson did or didn't do, but when a human being doesn't have the ability to grow the way they're supposed to grow, then we'll all reap the disadvantages of that. Human beings weren't meant to be allowed. They were not meant to have our childhoods taken away from us. and or any other part of our aspects of our personality. And when that happens, it's a real damn shame. A real damn shame. So, yeah. Let's see. Who else is written in? Brian Knight writes in and says, one of the reasons I don't buy foreign language movies is because Hollywood or the manufacturers can't get subtitles correct. I've lost count of movies where they use white lettering for subtitles and then it blends into the background of white, light colors or mixed patterns, making them illegible. Yellow lettering does help, but with the widescreen formats, there's plenty of room for large, legible letters for viewers to read and follow the movie. Have you ever discussed the career of Jess Franco on your podcast? You know what? I've never discussed the career of Jess Franco, actually. That would be definitely something interesting to discuss. I have a number of Jess Franco movies. But yeah, what an interesting cat he is. I don't know if one show could do it justice. I feel your pain about subtitles, but that doesn't stop me from, I power through it. But I know it's so annoying when they don't do subtitles right. It's a real bummer, but I do feel that I would rather power my way through bad subtitles and not see a foreign film. R. Bruce McGill writes in and says, Director Burnett. Well, thank you, sir. Sir, my name is R. Bruce McGill. I, like so many others, was thrilled to see the pre-finalized production videos for Star Trek Axanar, the film that will never be made, parts 1 through 3, that you posted to YouTube roughly 10 months ago. The entire Trekkie community felt the pain of not being able to see what is clearly a much better version and vision of Star Trek come to fruition, especially in light of the insults to Star Trek, Discovery, and Picard, but enough said about those. I'm just taking a shot in the dark by messaging you because I've always believed in the old saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I began a project in 2014 called the Iconic Time Box, which I've worked on for years, trying to make a proof-of-concept movie trailer similar to what was done on Star Trek Axanar. I must say that Prelude to Axanar was a huge inspiration for me to push forward with my story. I was very disappointed when Paramount and CBS put the lawsuit out and the Axanar project ground to a halt. Sadly, things did not turn out well for my project either, for other reasons. I was forced to adapt my script to a novel, which is also called The Iconic Time Box. I kind of like that title, though. However, I've never given up on the hope of being able to follow through and making my story into a sci-fi movie. I am not writing you to ask for anything nor to pitch anything. All I seek is hopefully some advice on how to possibly bring this about, if you can offer any. With the recent failures of Star Wars, Star Trek, and Doctor Who franchises, I was looking to do a story about time travel in which goes back to the origin of what made science fiction great. I also wanted to do something with time travel that hasn't been done before. I do have a short rudimentary video on YouTube which shows some of the featured scenes of what was planned for the movie. I know you're busy, but if you can find a spare moment to have a look, that would be great. And I would certainly very much appreciate any advice you could give on the best course to take to make this a reality. Normally, I would not have bothered to write you at all, but in looking at how you actually took the time to video some of the space station, the space action scenes of Axanar with your phone as a storyboard, and how those short clips became a reality in the CGI SFX, it showed me the artistic eye you have for detail in capturing the essence of the story you were wanting to tell. Here is a link to my video. I will not take up any more of your time. Thank you for your consideration. Your fellow geek, R. Bruce McGill. Well, R. Bruce McGill, there is no link in your letter. So please send it to me. I will look at it. But I think you ask a question that I get a lot, which is a very relevant question. People are always asking me, well, Rob, how am I, if I want to make a science fiction movie, and what do I do to proceed with getting it made? Well, I think Mr. McGill has the right idea. It's very difficult nowadays to get anybody interested in simply a spec script. However, if you do it as, say, a graphic novel's pretty close to what a movie can look like. I mean, obviously we use storyboards and things to sell the idea. So I think teaming up with an artist and taking your story and turning it into a graphic novel that you can, one, crowdfund and then later sell, so you can get the money back it's going to cost you to pay the artist to draw the work. But you have something you could take to somebody and say, this is what I want. I want to adapt this into my science fiction film. And when you have that, that's something that it's invaluable to have. It's really an invaluable thing to have. So I would suggest perhaps, rather than try and write a book or something and expect it to be turned into the great American science fiction time travel thriller, try it in another medium first. There's a great graphic novel that came out a couple years ago about time travel called Patience. Look up Patience, and that is going to be turned into a movie. But the graphic novel was irresistible. You look at the graphic novel and you're like, oh, I totally get this. I'd love to see this as a movie. And if your graphic novel is good enough, then maybe somebody will see it and look at it and want to turn it into a film. I think that's the best way to approach things. Turn it into a medium where it's either a short story. Well, short stories are hard, but when you have a graphic novel, everybody will look at a graphic novel, give it a gander. So I would suggest maybe try that route. And then you've got something that you can sell and go, look at this. People don't have to read a book and imagine it. They've got it on the page. And I think that's something that's very, very important. So how cool is that? Go do that. I'll buy it. I'll promote your crowdfund campaign. I think that could be pretty cool. Why not try it? Let's see. Let's see what you're doing. I think I'll go take a gander at what's back over here in the chat. Where was I? Darth. Is that real? Is that real? Well, let's see if this is real. I shall see. First, Darth Plato says, the menu movie tie-in in question was interesting. Do you remember the Star Trek 3 promo with, I think, Taco Bell, where they had movie scenes on the cups? These scenes, such as the Enterprise blowing up, spoil the movie. I vaguely remember that, but I hate when they do that. The McDonald's Happy Meals had the transporter disaster. On one of the Happy Meals literally has the transporter disaster from Star Trek the Motion Picture. So as you're eating your food, as you're having your Big Mac or whatever, you can look in comic book form how two people horribly die in the transporter when it turns them inside out. So yes, I do not like it when tie-ins spoil the movie. Now, 1001 Johnny sent me a very enormous super chat. First of all, I'm humbled and touched before you, sir. So thank you for supporting the channel in that way. Very much appreciate it. Goes on to say, Rob, you have made my night with the surprise of Mr. Bryan Singer to start the show. I was detained from reacting immediately to the surprise in the chat, but I screamed out, no! In disbelief to be hearing the director of Superman Returns appearing out of nowhere. This $300 is my typing my hat to you and Mr. Singer. Well, 1001 Johnny, first of all, thank you very, very much. I will tell Brian that you are typing the hat or tipping the hat for him being here. Brian has been on the show before. I've called him randomly. He's actually one of my oldest, dearest friends in LA. I've known him for over 30 years now, and I was followed his career in earnest. We became friends through the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, and we were at USC together. But we met really because of Dr. Donald Reed, who's no longer with us. And so Brian has been a friend of mine for a long time. I've done 4 documentaries for him. I did X-Men 1 with Dave Parker, X-Men 2 with Dave Parker, The Usual Suspects, and Superman Returns. So then he kind of lost interest. After Superman Returns, they did Valkyrie, and Tom Cruise wasn't so keen on having my presence on set all the time, and that's fine. I did get to meet him because of Valkyrie, so that was fun. But, yeah, and thank you so much. So that is very, very sweet of you to do that and support the channel the way. Brian he'll love that you did that, by the way. He'll love it. Of course, then he'll ask me to take half of the super chat and give it to him, which I will jokingly laugh, and he'll be like, well, you are going to do that, aren't you? No, I'm kidding. He won't say that. Well, he might. Evan Newman says, would you ever be willing to share what your idea was for Brainiac in Superman Returns 2? I love the version of the character in the animated series where he's kind of a mix of Brainiac and Zod, and he's one of Kal-El's Last Connection Krypton. Well, Evan, I'll be happy to tell you what it was. I ripped it off. My idea absolutely came from the animated series and how it how it would have began. It would have began on Krypton, and you would have seen, you would have found out that Krypton had at the center of one of the crystal cities a repository of all their knowledge that was presided over by Brainiac. And I would have had, like, he would have had like an infinity symbol or some kind of a helix, something. And he is basically the caretaker of all Kryptonian knowledge. And the Kryptonian elders that have been informed by Jor-El that the planet is going to be destroyed go to consult with him, go to consult with this, and his name obviously is not Brainiac, but go to consult with this AI, and they ask him, are Jor-El's findings correct? Is Krypton going to explode? And of course, this caretaker, who's later revealed as Brainiac, says, no, he's wrong. And at the same time, while this is going on and they're dismissed, we see the caretaker making all kinds of preparations. And as Krypton is exploding and everything, we see it, this citadel, this information we find out is a giant spacecraft. And our character literally lifts off. And also you see Superman's ship go one way, a little Kal-El's ship go one way, and you see our other main character going the other way, because our other character is not necessarily going to Earth. He's just absconding with all Kryptonian, all the knowledge of the 28 known galaxies, and is taking off. Well, what would have happened at the end of Superman Returns, you know that we have the planet that's being created, the artificial planet that's a result of the crystals growing and Superman flinging it in. Well, it would continue on, and it would become a planet as it grows, and the gravitational forces. And there's power. There's Kryptonian power it's acting like a lighthouse. And so it attracts this ship, this citadel, and we don't know what he's been doing in the interim. We don't know what this creature has been doing. And it turns out that the creature finds, let's just call him Brainiac, that Brainiac finds the beacon that is the planet that's created because of the events of the end of Superman Returns, and finds his way to Earth. And what the character of Brainiac wants to do, and you find this out in the course of the story, is to live. It wants to be a flesh and blood Kryptonian. It doesn't want to be an artificial life form. And in coming to Earth, it sees that Superman's son, first of all, it comes to Earth and Superman thinks, it pretends it's a Kryptonian. And Superman thinks, oh, it's my fellow countryman, and they become good friends, and Superman doesn't feel alone, and this character becomes the cause celeb around the world. It's another Kryptonian. But then our character Brainiac does things like intervenes in wars and stops things from happening, and drops the cure for cancer on Earth. And what it's doing is it's altering human civilization, because it has no father figure like Jor-El to tell people what to do with itself. So, and this character turns and says, Kal-El, you had the technology. You could have stopped cancer. You could have stopped terminal diseases. You could have done a lot for this planet, but you haven't. And the creature is slowly turning the world against Superman. Everybody, including Lois. And by making the world a better place, by fundamentally altering human civilization on a grand scale. And Superman is becoming increasingly alienated. And then Superman goes up to this Citadel ship and finds out the truth, that Brainiac, in the time that Superman was able to get to Earth, it took a lot longer, thousands of years. Brainiac has been traveling the galaxy, and he's been destroying civilizations and acquiring their knowledge. And once he acquires their knowledge, he doesn't want anyone else to have it, so he eradicates the civilization. And what he's been trying to do is he wants to live. He wants to be a flesh and blood being, and he sees that he can transform, or he can take his consciousness and put it into Superman's son, to the young boy that we meet in Superman Returns, which he eventually does. And Superman and Brainiac, it sort of went from there. That's, in a nutshell, that's kind of where I was going. So the gist of it would be that Brainiac, under the guise of being an altruistic Kryptonian, comes down to Earth and does the things to Earth that everybody wished Superman would do, which is make the Earth a better place. But what Brainiac is doing is he optimizes civilizations and then takes as much out of them as he can before he destroys them. That's his modus operandi. And Superman is the only one that knows this, but he's been sort of ostracized from the world because he hasn't helped the way Brainiac does. So that's kind of where it was going. And, yeah. Benzins sends in a super chat and says, I really like Superman Returns, Rob. I hope there will be a director's cut one day, including all of your content. I sent you a DM on Facebook referring to steel books. Yes, well, I agree. I would like to see a version. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I'd like to see another version of that. As for my content, maybe I could go back in, and the problem is, obviously Brian and Kevin Spacey, and there's things that have happened around the film that have sort of tarnished it. So people would rather brush it under the carpet, and I think that's unfortunate. But I would really like to see, yeah. I mean, I'd like to see, and my stuff. Maybe I could just do it and release it on YouTube, because there's a lot there, and I think it's worthy of doing. But thank you about that. Sonny Dominguez, our friend Sonny Dominguez, says mob rule can be stopped when artists wake people up from the artificial woke cult. Art is being censored by the consumer, forcing artists to color between the lines or risk the mob targeting them. Doesn't that contradict the spirit of art? Yes. 100%. It absolutely contradicts the spirit of art, and I think you're absolutely correct about that very thing, for sure. And I think eventually it's going to go away, because you know what? Our civilization was doing just fine. I mean, lately, over the last decade, things have been co-opted, and we're going down a real wrong path, because this idea of I call it being woke, or call it whatever you want, it doesn't take into account that human beings are deeply flawed, and we are also slaves to our biology, and sometimes we don't do good things, and we're not always thinking in terms of other people. We're not always thinking about doing the best things in the world. Sometimes we're only thinking about ourselves, and rightfully so. It's interesting. I like people. I grew up in a household, as I've said many times before, my parents did not have an unkind word to say about anyone else. My dad liked people. He liked people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds. He just liked people. I like people. And it's really interesting now that I have been branded a racist by critical race theory and, say, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility book. I've been branded a racist. Like, I grew up my whole life liking people, all of their different problems and foibles and all the different kinds of diversities we have as the people of the world do. And yet, and by the way, I don't believe that race dominates my thought process. My thought process, how am I going to get through the day? How am I going to make enough money to feed everybody? How am I going to... I don't... And when I meet people that are different than me, I like those differences. I like them. I like people from different cultures, people that are different shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds. I like them. I genuinely do. I know people are like, well, Rob, that's your privilege talking. I'm like, really? What privilege is that? If you're born in America, you're privileged. I mean, sure, we have all different kinds of privilege, but I mean, there's how do you want to define it? And all of this stuff, they're just defining one aspect of privilege. I would like to have been born with a larger penis. I wasn't. I had to compensate in other versions. That I'm certainly not privileged there. Very average, lackluster maybe. So I had to learn to wield it. But that's how, if we're talking just that arena, I was not born privileged. So I know people are like TMI. No, that's fine. It's all good. It works. It's good. But I'll let other people decide that for me. But that's what I mean. Like I am less talented than a lot of other people. I was not born with the privilege of having enormous talent as, say, an artist. I didn't have that talent either. And I think it's really weird that everybody wants to... It depends what your issue is. Whatever your issue is, that's what you're going to fall down along those lines. But I think we live in a really weird world. I mean, obviously, our planet is better off if people get voices and everybody gets the opportunity to pursue the goals and the life they want to pursue, unfettered by others. And that I honestly believe that I don't think that everybody should get everything they want, because that's unrealistic. There's no such thing as equality of outcome, because we're not equal. Human beings, the idea all men are created equal is one thing, but I'm not equal to the next guy. If my friend Greg Smith, who's frequently a moderator here, he's a much better artist than me. I could probably spend my entire life trying to teach myself to be an artist, but unless I was born with that inherent ability to draw or something, well, I'm always going to be unequal to Greg Smith in the area of drawing and art. And that's okay, because we're not equal. Greg's better at it than me. He'll always be better at it than me. There's nothing wrong with that. Greg's not out there trying to make movies. You know, I mean, everybody's different. You know, and that's good. People should be able to. We live in a world where every single human being on this planet should be able to pursue the life that they would like for themselves and their family. That's what I'm coming from. That's where I'm at. Everybody deserves that opportunity. And I think if we can help our fellow travelers on this planet, our fellow human beings, realize those goals, then we're better off. You know, and we all have to move forward together. This idea that we're going to look to all of the horrible things human beings did to one another in the past, why do that? What does that have to do with anything? I wasn't alive 150 years ago. And why stop there? Why not go back and take responsibility for the last 10,000 years of all the horrible injustices that were done to people all over the world? It doesn't work that way. We all have to move forward together. You can't change. You can't replace one oppression for another, which is what people want to do in the idea of justice or something. It's weird. Nick Parrish says, "What's up, Rob? You know it's funny when In the Heights flopped and the Hollywood pros were stunned. But Rob, an amateur box office nerd, told you before the movie came out, Rob, that I, an amateur box office nerd, told you before the movie came out that pre-release seat reservations looked weak and the trailer views were so-so." Well, you're right, Nick. So, Rob, I don't want to disrespect the pros who forecast box office numbers for a living, but my question is, do you think the analysts put feelings over facts because nothing other than the fact that it was based on a respected play screamed big hit? Well, you know, people have said that everyone thought, look, the industry can sometimes be a little unaware of the real world. And I think the people within the industry think something's going to be a big hit. I think that's why Blade Runner 2049 got made. As much as I really love Blade Runner 2049, making a sequel to Blade Runner, by the way, Blade Runner 2049 is probably the best sequel that ever could have been made from Blade Runner. But the idea that anybody mounted that sequel in the first place, I think was a mistake. It was a mistake. Because Blade Runner wasn't a hit. It was always a niche thing, and to spend $170 million on that sequel, I'm glad it got made. There's a lot in that sequel I love. I really do. I think there's a lot to love about that movie. It's beautifully done. I love the soundtrack. I love the acting. I love the whole visuals of it all. I love the feel of it all. But let's face it, who thought that was a good idea? And In the Heights, I think sometimes the industry is a little out of touch, and they think things are going to be hits that aren't. And there's nothing we can do about that, unfortunately. But you're right. You're right, Nick. I think looking at the indicators, I think people forget sometimes what were the views of the trailer like. That's a really good indicator. And how many people watch the first 8 minutes of the movie they put on YouTube. I think you're absolutely right about that. S-Beam says, "Hey, Rob, did you see the tease of Loki and Sylvie figures from Hot Toys? Totally looking forward to seeing how they look." I did. Yes, I was expecting that. But yes, the teases dropped. And yes, they look good. I mean, for what we see, I'll pick them up. Good stuff, S-Beam. Well, listen, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls from across the 28 known galaxies. Superman reference. Go back and watch today. Go back and watch Superman Returns. I think it's on HBO Max. And if you have the Blu-rays or anything, go watch my documentary again. Check that out. But yeah, I don't know if you can find Requiem for Krypton. I know there's pieces of it. The documentary is called Requiem for Krypton, Making Superman Returns. I think you can find pieces of the documentary on YouTube. Also, look up Brian's blogs. I shot all those, and Escape Room director Adam Robitel put those all together. So check that out. But yeah, and on that note, I'm going to bring this chat, Robservations episode 713, to an end. I want to thank my moderating staff, Joshua Levesque. I think Louise X. Sparrow is here. A lot of people are here. I think Bunyan Snipe was here earlier. I'm not sure. We shall see. But, I guess maybe only Josh is here. Bunyan Snipe is here. I think Louise X. Sparrow is here too. But for all of you who are here, thank you for being the great moderators, the great blue wrenches that you are. I very much appreciate it. And for all of you who generously support the channel through tips and super chats. Thank you so very much. And wow, I'll tell you, 1001 Johnny, that was very nice of you. Try to bring Brian on more. But anyway, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And also, if you want to write letters to the Burnettwork, you can, to me, to Observations. You send them to the Burnettwork.net website. Go there, and all the letters I read are up there. If you want to read Willow Yang's letters, and you should because they're all good, you can find her column, Willow Talk, where it's not really a column, but we put our letters under the title Willow Talk, and go there and see what's up with you. And on that note, I want to say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, remember, come back for the Midnighter tonight. I'll be doing the Midnighter tonight. I don't know for how much longer I'm going to be doing the Midnighter, but I'll do one tonight. And as always, have a better day.